When a typhoon pounded the ocean in early December 1943, the submarine Sailfish operated under strict orders from ultra-intelligence. Somewhere ahead, a Japanese convoy, including an escort carrier, a cruiser, and 2 destroyers, pushed through the weather to reach its destination. The radar flickered at 9,000 yards, but the crew could see nothing through the midnight storm. Everything depended on their instruments. Bill Dillon, the radar operator, focused on the blips. The enemy was close. Sailfish eased into attack position, and the boat's crew waited in tense silence until the captain gave the order. When they locked onto Chūyō, 2 torpedoes found their mark, and the escort carrier shuddered under the hits, left trailing and crippled behind the main body of the convoy. Captain Ward was not satisfied with a single blow. He pressed the attack as long as fuel and fortune allowed, driving his men and machinery hard until the damaged carrier began to slide beneath the waves. The sudden, brutal success stirred memories among the ship's company, echoes of an earlier name, an earlier catastrophe, and the lessons learned from it. Before she was Sailfish, before the war swallowed the globe, the boat had another life and another name. On March 1, 1939, USS Squalus, a Sargo-class submarine named for a type of shark, was commissioned into the U.S. Navy. She measured 310 feet and displaced about 1,450 tons. Her 2 diesel-electric engines gave her respectable surface speed and enough endurance to remain at sea for weeks, while her design allowed dives to depths exceeding 250 feet. Squalus embodied the Navy's late 1930s push to improve undersea warfare capability, more reliable propulsion, better habitability for long patrols, improved torpedo arrangements, and a mix of deck and anti-air weapons that let her handle both surface targets and airborne threats. She carried 8 21-inch torpedo tubes, a 3-inch deck gun for surface actions, and 50 caliber machine guns for anti-air defense, all packed into a hull meant to send sailors and steel into the deep for extended missions. Not long after entering service, Squalus and her crew, under Lieutenant Oliver F. Naquin, ran through a series of shakedown dives off Portsmouth, New Hampshire. After what seemed like a string of successful tests, on the morning of May 23, 1939, she left Portsmouth with a full complement for one more dive. The routine test became nightmarish near the Isles of Shoals when the main air induction valve malfunctioned for reasons that were never fully settled. Seawater poured into the forward compartments. The crew fought to seal valves and force air into ballast tanks. The boat rose briefly and then fell as pressure and flooding overwhelmed systems. The battery compartment flooded and released chlorine when seawater contacted battery acid, creating a toxic atmosphere and forcing the crew to shut down electrical systems. In the confusion and darkness, some men escaped through watertight doors, but many were trapped as Squalus fell to the ocean floor and came to rest nearly 250 feet down. The ordeal that followed tested technology, training, and resolve. Of the 59 people on board, 33 ultimately survived and 26 perished. The survivors found themselves in a steel coffin with diminishing air and rising levels of carbon dioxide and toxic gases. Commander Naquin and his remaining officers worked to maintain order and hope, rationing breath and energy. They fired smoke signals and sent up a marker buoy fitted with a telephone line, the fragile lifeline that would briefly allow surface teams to communicate with the men trapped below. Rescue ships and divers converged on the area, but the depth and weather made conventional methods nearly useless. Before Squalus, no successful submarine rescue had been carried out beyond very shallow depths. Faced with a catastrophe that outstripped existing practice, the Navy called on Lieutenant Commander Charles Swede Momsen and the Experimental Diving Unit. Momsen, already known for inventing the Momsen lung, which could save a downed submariner's life in an emergency ascent, had also helped develop a new rescue apparatus, the McCann rescue chamber, a pear-shaped diving bell designed to mate with a submarine's escape hatch and carry survivors to the surface. The device had never been tested in a live rescue at operational depth, but there was no alternative. The only East Coast McCann bell was aboard USS Falcon, and after weather delays, the Falcon and Momsen's team arrived on the scene to begin the most daring undersea rescue attempt of the era. The operation that followed was methodical, dangerous, and improvisational. Divers descended to clear the escape hatch and to rig a seal where the chamber could latch. The McCann chamber was lowered on heavy cables and, once seated on the submarine's hatch, could transfer a small group of men up to the surface in relative safety. Each trip required precise alignment, steady hands, and nerves of steel. The Belle could carry only a handful of survivors each run, and the work went on through long hours and with the sea working against the rescuers. Over the course of several trips, the chamber brought the trapped men one by one into bright air and the arms of waiting medics. Those pulled from the black water were weak, bewildered, and sickened by battery gases and carbon dioxide, but they were alive. The rescue became an international story of ingenuity and courage as radio broadcasts and newspapers followed every painful minute. In the aftermath, the Navy salvaged Squalus, repaired her hull and systems, and recommissioned the boat under a new name, Sailfish. The lessons learned from the disaster led to procedural changes, improved equipment, and renewed emphasis on emergency systems and crew training across the submarine force. Lieutenant Commander Momsen and the men who risked their lives to bring others home were celebrated for pioneering techniques that would define submarine rescue for decades. For the survivors and the families of the lost, the episode left an imprint, a hard-earned respect for the ocean's power, for mechanical fallibility, and for the fragile chain that links sailors to the surface. Years later, in the heat and fear of wartime patrols, the boat that had once been Squalus and then Sailfish would fight, sink enemy vessels, and carry forward the memory of those who had gone down and those who had pulled others back up again. Desperation mounted as divers worked under immense pressure. It took them over 40 painstaking minutes to lower the cable and another 22 minutes to secure the diving bell. After those tense moments, the bell reached Squalus, a watertight seal was made, and the sailors inside passed hot soup to the exhausted crew. With the connection established, the skipper quickly identified the weakest men, and the first of 7 groups were loaded into the rescue chamber, reaching the surface after 2 p.m., more than 24 hours after the initial incident. Well aware of New England's unpredictable weather, the rescuers carried 9 sailors instead of 7 on the second trip, followed by another 9 on the third. During the fourth and final ascent of that sequence, carrying 8 men, including Skipper Naquin, the Belle suddenly became stuck at 60 feet because of a fouled cable. With no other choice, Momsen ordered the cable cut, allowing the Belle and the terrified men to settle back to the sea floor before reattaching and beginning the ascent again. Finally, after nearly 5 hours, all 33 surviving sailors were rescued from the sunken Squalus in a resounding and historic success. Enlisted divers William R. Batterson, Orson L. Crandall, James H. McDonald, and John Mosey were subsequently awarded the Medal of Honor. With the immediate rescue complete, the Navy faced the problem of salvaging the multi-million-dollar submarine resting on the ocean floor. As a brand-new vessel with expensive, state-of-the-art features, Squalus was worth the effort. The Navy called Momsen back to the Isles of Shoals to lead the salvage, with Rear Admiral Cyrus W. Cole overseeing the operation and Salvage Officer Lieutenant Floyd A. Tuzler handling day-to-day tasks. The plan was to lift the submarine in 3 stages to prevent it from rising too quickly and sinking again. For 50 days, divers and crews worked around the clock, passing cables under the hull and attaching pontoons to create buoyancy. On July 13th, the crew successfully raised the stern, but when they tried to free the bow from dense blue clay, the submarine began to rise uncontrollably. Breaking free from her cables, Squalus shot upward. Nearly 30 feet of her bow briefly broke the surface before she plunged back to the ocean floor. Momsen later recalled, pontoons were smashed, hoses cut, and I might add, hearts were broken. After 20 additional days of intense preparation and a complete redesign of the pontoon and cable system, the team attempted another lift. This time the system worked. Success followed through the remaining lifts, and finally on September 13th, after more than 600 dive attempts over 4 months, Squalus was towed into Portsmouth. She was decommissioned on November 15th for a full overhaul, and on May 15, 1940, was recommissioned into the U.S. Navy under a new name, USS Sailfish. Despite the official change, the old name Squalus lingered among sailors, prompting the wartime commanding officer to issue strict orders banning any mention of the original name. The crew, however, joked by calling the vessel Squalfish, even under threat of court-martial. The new and improved USS Sailfish departed Portsmouth for the Pacific on January 16, 1941, arriving at Pearl Harbor in March. For months she operated out of Manila as part of the Asiatic Fleet submarines until the Japanese attack on December 7th. Sailfish set out for her first wartime patrol along the U.S. West Coast. On the night of December 13th, Sailfish encountered 2 Japanese destroyers and launched a submerged attack. The enemy detected her and dropped nearly 20 depth charges in response to her torpedoes. Despite a nearby explosion, no significant damage was inflicted and Sailfish managed to escape, returning to Manila on December 17th to end her patrol. Throughout the war, Sailfish's patrols ranged from uneventful to highly distinguished. During her second patrol under Richard G. Voog on January 27, 1942, off Halmahera, she damaged a Myoko-class cruiser with 4 torpedoes. After refueling, she headed toward the Java Sea and intercepted an enemy destroyer on March 2nd, launching an unsuccessful attack before diving deep to avoid depth charges from the destroyer and patrolling aircraft. That same night, the crew sighted what they believed was the aircraft carrier Kaga, but it was actually the aircraft ferry Kamagawa Maru. They fired 4 torpedoes, scored 2 hits, and left the target ablaze while nearby escorts responded with 40 depth charges. Sailfish evaded them all. Later that summer, Sailfish intercepted a Japanese freighter, launching 2 torpedoes. After hearing explosions as they dove, the crew resurfaced 90 minutes later, only to find the freighter gone. After shifting her base of operations to Brisbane, Australia, Sailfish, now under the command of John R. Dias Moore, began her 6th patrol on September 13th, heading toward the heavily contested Solomon Islands. On the 19th, she fired 3 torpedoes at a Japanese mine layer but missed. The enraged enemy responded with a fierce barrage of depth charges, forcing the submarine deep. 11 explosions rocked the boat but caused only minor damage. Following this narrow escape, Sailfish returned to Brisbane on November 24th. Sailfish set out on her 7th patrol to waters south of New Britain and on December 2nd attacked a destroyer with no results. She made no other confirmed contacts until Christmas Day, when the crew believed they had struck a Japanese submarine. Post-war analysis, however, could not confirm the claim. After an overhaul at Mare Island from January to April, the repaired submarine departed Pearl Harbor for her 8th patrol. Refueled and ready, she reached her station off Haiyu on June 15th and sank the freighter Shinjumaru with a stern torpedo. Only 10 days later, Sailfish encountered another convoy and sank the freighter Immaru. Enemy forces answered with a brutal 10-hour depth charge attack, but she escaped with only minor damage. On July 25th, now led by William R. Lefevre, Sailfish began her 9th patrol in the Formosa Strait and off Okinawa, returning to Pearl Harbor in September after an otherwise uneventful mission. After a refit at Pearl Harbor, Sailfish, under the command of Robert E. McCormick Ward, set out on her 10th patrol on November 17th, heading south of Honshu. Early in the patrol, the crew faced a dangerous hot-run torpedo in Tube 8 when the engine ignited inside the tube, risking detonation. Captain Ward inspected and ensured it was safely ejected, but 2 of 8 tubes remained unusable for the rest of the patrol. After refueling at Midway, Sailfish received ultra-intelligence about a nearby fast-moving Japanese convoy that included an escort carrier, a cruiser, and 2 destroyers. Just after midnight on December 4, 1943, in the midst of high seas and typhoon winds, Sailfish prepared to engage the enemy, setting the stage for one of her most significant confrontations. Amid the storm, she relied solely on radar. Picking up contact 9,000 yards southeast of Yokosuka, radar operator Bill Dillon later recalled the tense moment. They were flying blind, midnight with nothing visible, only blips. They fired 4 torpedoes, scored 2 hits, and it seemed almost impossible that they had struck the target. The carrier Chūyō took 2 devastating hits, limped behind the convoy, and eventually succumbed to the waves. The sinking of Chūyō was a rare and significant victory. Only 4 Japanese escort carriers were lost to American submarines during the Pacific War, but it carried a tragic twist. On board Chūyō were 21 survivors from her sister ship USS Sculpin, which had been sunk by the Japanese destroyer Yamagumo weeks earlier. Of Sculpin's crew, only 1 survived Chūyō's sinking. On another patrol between Luzon and Formosa, Sailfish acted not just as hunter but as rescuer. On October 12, 1944, while operating alongside submarines Pomfret and Parche, Sailfish received word that 11 Navy aviators who had completed strikes against Formosa had been forced to ditch in the Philippine Sea. Enemy vessels approached to capture the downed airmen, and a tense firefight erupted. Sailfish used her deck gun to sink 1 enemy ship and damage another, successfully warding off the threat and rescuing survivors. The following day, she located and recovered another aviator, and with all survivors aboard, she steamed to Saipan, arriving on October 24th. After minor repairs and refueling, the submarine damaged a Japanese destroyer and a landing ship in the Luzon Strait and, after narrowly escaping depth charge attacks, completed her 12th and final wartime patrol on December 11, 1944. After serving as a training ship, she was officially decommissioned in December 1945. From a submarine raised from the ocean floor to a celebrated warship, Sailfish earned 9 battle stars and the Presidential Unit Citation, particularly for her role in sinking the Japanese escort carrier Chūyō